Hey, everybody, welcome in. It is a mailbag edition, a Tuesday mailbag edition of the Utopia Football Podcast. Sorry about the mic glitch right there. Good to be with all of you. I am Sean Pendergast, one half of Payne and Pendergast. Those of you who listen to the Utopia Football Podcast know that. Those of you that are new to the podcast probably know it, but I think it's always polite to introduce oneself. So appreciate you guys downloading and listening to this episode. We've got a ton of mailbag questions to get into, a lot of them about the Texans roster and what I'm seeing out at camp. I'm actually recording this just before heading out to NRG Stadium for practice number 15 of training camp. They've got 3 practices this week, a couple more next week, and then they've got one, I think, shortly after the week after the Rams game. But a lot of you wanting to know what's happening with certain position battles, certain players. So we have a lot of good questions to the mailbag today. So this one will be maybe a bigger version of the mailbag, and we're going to get right into the mailbag stuff because I'll have another podcast later today with a report following Texans practice. So if you want to continue to get the podcast as they drop, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Hit the subscribe button so you don't have to worry about finding it or locating it or having the algorithm feed it to you. If you hit subscribe, the internet will feed it to you. Give us a rating and a review as well. Always appreciate that. And a reminder that if you do want to email the show, your email will not get into this mailbag, but it can get into future mailbags at houmailbag@gmail.com, houmailbag@gmail.com. If you're streaming this right now on YouTube, you can see it at the bottom of the screen right there. And the mailbag is a feature that endures all year long. We do it typically on Tuesdays during the season. We may tweak that a little bit, but I think Tuesday's a good mailbag day. So we keep doing that during the season. And so just send in what you can, and appreciate all of you telling a friend, sharing the podcast, as we are in a Tuesday leading up to the Giants game, first home game of 2024, albeit preseason, but the first chance to have a game day out there at NRG Stadium. Should be just super comfortable noon kickoff weather in August for the next 2 weeks. Both of these games, the Giants and the Rams, are both noon kickoffs. So hydrate, people. That's what I would tell you. Hydrate. So let's get right into it. The mailbag again. If you are looking for reports from practice, I'll have one for you later on today. So let's start with my man Jason in Leander, who says, "Hey Sean, he's got a couple questions here. Hey Sean, please rank your expected top 3 Texans in order in each of these categories: catches, yards, and TDs." Ooh, wow. And he's got a couple other questions here, but I'll start with that one. These are obviously guesses, albeit educated guesses. The one take that I have hung my hat on this offseason, and I feel like I'm in the minority here, because Stephon Diggs has been a number 1 receiver really for the last 4 or 5 years of his career. Nico Collins ended up being the number 1 here last year. But I'm going to stick with Tank Dell leading this team in receiving yards this year. And I think we got a little glimpse in that Steeler game of what that might look like, with Tank Dell leading the team in receiving yards. There was a lot of space out there, and Tank was able to find a little seam there in the zone, just drop right in there. And CJ and Tank, who already have amazing chemistry. Keep in mind, and I've said this before, Tank was on his way to Nico Collins' numbers last season. When he got hurt in the Denver game, which was week 13. So he essentially missed weeks 13 through 18. So that's the final 6 games of the year. He missed a game earlier in the season after he got concussed against Atlanta. He missed the New Orleans game. So that's basically 7 games that he missed. And then even in that Atlanta game, he missed the whole second half of that game because he got concussed. So he missed damn near half the season, and he had over 700 yards receiving. So he was well on his way to a 12 or 1,300 yard season, Tank Dell was. So I'm going Tank Dell in yards. Catches, I'm going to go with Stephon Diggs. I think he, in the short and intermediate game, and as a guy, as an outlet, a safety valve kind of thing, I think Stephon Diggs is going to have a big year. And touchdowns, I'm going to stick with Tank on that one. So it's weird that the one guy who gets extended by the Texans, the highest paid of the three receivers, Nico Collins, who's now making $24 million a year. I think Nico's going to have a really good year, but you're asking me who's going to lead. So those would be my top. Those would be. I'm just going to give you who I think is going to lead in those categories, Jason. So I would go catches, Diggs, yards, and TDs, Tank. And I think I'm in the minority. I think there's a lot of people that would have Nico. I think there's a lot of people that have Nico at the top of at least catches and yards. Touchdowns are, I think there's a little more randomness to the touchdowns because there's only so many of those. Also, how do you feel about the Eagles to win the NFC East at -125? Jason asks. I would say not great, except that division, I think that division is going to go in 2 years, almost like a reverse Texans thing. In 2 years, the Texans have gone from a laughingstock to one of the best teams in football. In 2 years, that division has gone from a team that went to the Super Bowl, the Cowboys who win double-digit games every year, the Giants a playoff team, and then kind of a frisky Washington team. And now you've got Washington rebuilding with a rookie quarterback and a new coach. You've got the Giants, who I think are going to be one of the worst teams in football because I think Daniel Jones sucks. The Cowboys, I don't know what the Cowboys are until they get all this contractual stuff straightened out, but they did nothing this offseason. And then the Eagles, the quarterback hates the coach. That's a really bad place to start, So Eagles I would just stay away from that division, honestly. -125. How do I feel about it? That's how I feel about it. Jason also points out, quote, I can't believe my daughter got into Harvard, end quote, was an epic humble brag by you, Sean. Is that a bigger humble brag than reading your email that reminds people that my daughter got into Harvard, Jason? All right. Appreciate you, Jason, as always. No wrestling in your email, Jason. Come on, man. Fletcher and Austin, how has Brevin Jordan looked in camp? Will he ever establish himself as a legitimate starting tight end option in the NFL? Brevin Jordan's been injured again this year. And last year he was injured too. He missed most of camp last year. I thought that was going to be it for Brevin Jordan, but clearly Nick Caserio drafted Brevin Jordan, so obviously he sees something in Brevin. But D'Amico Ryans has really taken a shine to Brevin Jordan as well. They both like him. Man, D'Amico would not shut up about how awesome Brevin was throughout the spring and early on in training camp. And when they would do film, it seemed like Brevin always showed up in the highlights and whatnot. So they clearly like him. They clearly think there's something there. He's in a position group where there's not a ton of competition. There's only 4 tight ends in camp. I'm not really counting Dalton Keene as a tight end in this whole thing. I don't think he's a factor. I think he's more of a fullback, like an Andrew Beck type than a tight end. So you've got Dalton Schultz, who's a lock, obviously. Cade Stover, who's a lock. Brevin Jordan, I think, is going to make the team. Then Tegan Catoriano is probably the one who's on the bubble, or they keep 4 tight ends. But if they keep 4 tight ends, that's another position that they'll need to steal from probably. So when he's been out there, he's looked good, I suppose. He was back out there on Sunday night. I don't think he'll ever be a legitimate starting, like a classic textbook starting tight end, just because he's undersized. I think there's a role for Brevin Jordan in the NFL as sort of a, kind of an X factor H-back type weapon, but I don't think he'll ever be like a true starting tight end. He says, you keep talking up. This is more Fletcher. You keep talking up Kamari Lassiter. I thought he projected more as a nickel corner due to his lack of speed and his tackling ability. But do you think he can match or improve upon Steven Nelson's play from prior years? I thought Nelson was sneaky, really solid. For the Texans. Nelson was incredibly solid last year. He's also a nutcase. That's why he's not on the team this year or on any team this year, I think, is partially because Steven Nelson is a bit loco. Kamari Lassiter has been playing outside corner this entire camp. Now, again, he's somebody who's banged up right now as well. But when he's been healthy, he's been playing outside corner opposite Derek Stingley, and he looks like a pro. He's been covering Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs and at times Tank Dell in practice, and he looks fine. His coverage is good. I wouldn't get too caught up in his 40 time. His football speed is fine. His instincts are really good, and he is a very, very willing tackler. So do I think he can improve upon Steven Nelson's play from prior years? I think if Kamari Lassiter gives you this year what Steven Nelson gave you last year, that's a major win for the Texans. Now, I think eventually Kamari Lassiter, I think they expect him to be better than Steven Nelson eventually. There's no question they expect him to be better than Steven Nelson eventually. But I think in year one, if you get from Kamari Lassiter what Steven Nelson gave you in 2023, more so 2023 than 2022, then I think that's a big win. Last one from Fletcher. With all the Hall of Fame talk, wondering, do you think DeAndre Hopkins has a chance at the Hall of Fame? Would he go in as a Texan? Going to be difficult with all these good receivers nowadays. Always got the sense that he and Bill O'Brien were incompatible. Okay, well, there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah, clearly he and Bill O'Brien were incompatible. Otherwise, he wouldn't have traded him for a ham sandwich. I think DeAndre is statistically on a Hall of Fame track. Now, what's hurt DeAndre lately, because his years as a Texan, especially 15 through 19, his last 5 seasons here, I mean, he was first-team All-Pro a few times. He was a second-team All-Pro. He had one down year, but that's when Brock Osweiler was his quarterback. He was on a Hall of Fame track, and then he was good at the outset in Arizona as well. He's been injured a lot the last few years. He had to serve a PED suspension a couple years ago. So, and now he's in Tennessee, and he's not even, I would bet he's not even the most productive receiver on that team this year, with Calvin Ridley there. So yeah, I think it's going to be tricky for DeAndre to get in. I don't know that you're going to get a lot of the same stories about DeAndre too that you got about, say, Andre Johnson, who people talked about just what a maniacal worker he was away from the field, in the building, at practice, didn't miss practice, couldn't wait to practice. DeAndre Hopkins is the total opposite of that. DeAndre Hopkins seems to hate practicing. I don't know if he hates it, but he doesn't do it nearly as much as guys like Andre Johnson. So I would say that if I had to bet, and you never know, because down the road there's veterans committees, there's things like that. Forever's a long time. But if I had to bet, I would bet that DeAndre Hopkins will be a guy who makes the semifinal, makes the final 25 for the Hall of Fame on maybe nearly an annual basis, and then a few times sniffs the top 10, but just never gets in. Guy like that. I'd like to see him get in. I like DeAndre Hopkins. Says you said you saw him once at Shot Bar, is what Fletcher says. Low key dude, nice looking girl with him. Fun fact: Pendergast household. My wife Amy used to bartend at Shot Bar in Midtown. That's where when I met her in 2010. She worked the little kiosk there. There's Shot Bar, the full bar, and then there's that little almost like lemonade stand off to the left there. She used to work the lemonade stand. And I would stand outside on the patio right next to it, and she would feed me free drinks once we started dating. But yeah, Amy used to work at Shop Bar. She worked at Shop Bar and Pub Fiction in Midtown. Good bartender. I can attest to the fact she was a good bartender, both at home and in actual bars. Good bartender. All right, Fletcher, appreciate you, man. Says cheers and please keep up the splendid work. I will do my best. Neil in Liverpool is back in. Love it when Liverpool checks in. Mate, no, that's Australia. Sorry. Is that racist of me to confuse an Australian colloquialism with the British? I hope it wasn't. I don't need Australia nor Liverpool coming at me. So Neil says this: another game with just one catch and not much else from John Mechie. I haven't gotten back and watched the game properly yet, but have the Texans reached the end of the line with Mechie? I'm rooting for the guy. I'm a cancer survivor myself. Neil, shout out to you, brother. Glad you're around. But at some point he has to show something. Other guys are doing a lot more to claim a roster spot right now. Keep up the great work. Still loving the pod. Thank you, Neil. I appreciate that. Yeah, here's the problem for John Mechie is that the 2 games so far, he has had basically the same performance, and neither of them have been good. He's had one inconsequential catch for under 10 yards and a dropped pass. Targeted twice, nothing really to show for it. And the problem is, literally, now that Jaden Yankee is gone, literally every other receiver that's in camp right now has done more than John Mechie in the 2 games. And look, I mean, obviously Diggs hasn't because he's played 6 snaps. So we know Diggs and Nico and Tank are going to be the starters. I think Noah Brown is on this team, but again, he's battling health issues. He missed the game on Friday last week against Pittsburgh, and he missed practice on Sunday. So Noah Brown's kind of a wild card in this thing because I think when he's healthy, he's clearly one of the 5 best receivers on this team, but he's banged up a lot. But even independent, pretend Noah Brown doesn't even exist. Xavier Hutchinson has made way more plays than John Mechie. He had 5 catches 2 games ago, and he had a 19-yard end around against the Steelers. Robert Woods had 4 catches against the Steelers. Johnny Johnson had a few catches against the Steelers. Quintez Cephas had a couple catches and trucked a guy in the Steeler game. Steven Sims had a catch for 16 yards, and he's got return ability and special teams on his side as well. I feel like I'm missing somebody here. There's another receiver I'm sure that I'm missing in this whole thing. Oh, Skoranek, my man. Go Irish. He's made some plays in games, and he plays on special teams. That's the other thing. Mechie doesn't play on special teams. I think Mechie's in real jeopardy. I think everybody in that building wants him to make the team because it's an amazing story. I've said this before. I'll say it again here. If Mechie doesn't show anything this week or in the game against the Giants, I think Caserio gets on the phone and sees what he can get for Mechie. Because here's the thing about Mechie, and I'll say the same thing about Dameon Pierce later in this pod, because I know we've got a million Dameon Pierce questions because he didn't do anything in that Steeler game either. I think both of those guys, Pierce and Mechie, will get picked up immediately if they get put on waivers. Pierce based on being a near 1,000-yard rusher 2 years ago, and Mechie based on being a second-round pick who has flashed upside at times during the spring and the summer months here, maybe just in a different system or with a change of scenery. I would call the Carolina Panthers about Mechie and see if they'll duke you like a 6th-round pick for him and pair him back up with Bryce Young, his guy from Alabama. Just see if it works. But I'm guessing Nick's already working the phones on some of this stuff because I think he can see which way some of these position battles are going. Neil, I appreciate the email. You were one of a handful of Mechie emails, but Neil, you get priority because you're from out of the United States. I'm not going to be a xenophobe. I want this to be a global podcast. So if you are now, I don't want some of you. If you're global, you're going to get priority if you have the same question as somebody else. Now, I don't want all of you who are like emailing from Hempstead and Conroe to, or even here in Houston to be, or even like Chuck in Denver, whose question I'm about to read. Chuck, you can't all of a sudden become, Charles from Paris or something like that just to get your question bumped up. Okay. Honesty. All right. Chuck says, hey, Sean. Hey, Chuck. Liked what I saw on Friday from Stroud and Dell. Daniil Hunter, Azeez Al-Shire, not impressed with DP or the O-line. I know the O-line was backups, but wanted to get your thoughts. There we go. Told you we had a Dameon Pierce question coming in and the O-line. I thought I think D'Amico captured it perfectly. I would also encourage you guys on the O-line stuff. Seth Payne, my co-host on his YouTube channel, did a really good breakdown of some of Dameon Pierce's carries in that game. That's not the O-line they're going to be trotting out there in week 1, I hope. Against the Indianapolis Colts. So yeah, there were some definite blocking glitches. Dameon Pierce had 4 carries for 4 yards. Any way you slice it, not a great day. I think the thing that's concerning about Dameon Pierce is that all this decisiveness and the confidence that we had heard about, kind of seen in environments out of practice, padded or not padded, where it's a little easier to look that way when you're not running to get tackled. He's running in a real game, and once again, he's breaking to the outside, and instead of boom planting that foot, he's pitter pat, and then plants the foot. Like he's taking 3 or 4 steps to change direction. I just don't know that it's going to work out with Dameon Pierce, similar to John Mechie. Like it just may not work out. Cam Akers looks way more acclimated to the system, which makes sense. When Cam Akers has been healthy, that's all he's ever played in is this system. But how long do you wait around for Dameon Pierce to show that he can become the back that they're hoping he can become? I think Dameon Pierce is in real jeopardy right now. Just put it that way. The O-line I'm not as worried about because that's, 3/5 of it wasn't what it's going to be in week 1. Neither of your tackles are out there. Shaq Mason's your most experienced offensive lineman. He's not out there. Kenyon Green and Juice Scruggs are still kind of in a way. Juice Scruggs isn't knocking off rust, but he's getting his first crack at the center position. And I thought Kenyon and Juice were fine. Kenyon in particular, I think looks good right now, which is, would be a revelation. It'd be a real find. Appreciate you, Chuck. Appreciate the question. Tyler and Conroe, is Cal McNair's comeback the most amazing comeback in the history of Houston sports? It's up there, man. Think about it. 3 years ago, the Texans could not send out a tweet from their team account without getting – and the tweet could be about anything. The tweet could be about parking. It could be about tickets. It could be a video from practice. It could be Toro doing funny shit, any of that stuff. And the replies would be one of two things: sell the team, fire Jack Easterby. That's it. And it was that way for a couple of years. It was really bad. And, sell the team is a direct shot at Cal. And I'm not sure where exactly the worm started to turn. I kind of have a feeling. But hiring D'Amico Ryans was obviously the big inflection point in all of this. Hiring D'Amico Ryans got Cal McNair and, by proxy, Hannah McNair a lot of their equity back with the fan base, that he was able to do that. Now, they were very fortunate that D'Amico played here and wanted to come here, because this was not a place that I don't think a lot of coaches wanted to come here. One, because the roster wasn't great. Two, for whatever reason, probably with some coaches, there was this stigma of them firing 2 coaches in 2 years, or really firing 3 coaches in 3 years if you throw Bill O'Brien in there. But hiring D'Amico Ryans was the beginning of the turn. Drafting C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson got the turn, about 270 degrees around, and then they finished the whole 360 by actually going out and having success on the field. And now Cal is really almost folk hero status in this town. And I'm sure this is a question that Tyler is sending in because of the shotgunning of the beer at the Luke Combs concert on Saturday. But if you guys missed Payne and Pendergast, a little behind the scenes on that. And if you missed the previous podcast, I actually talked to Hannah, or texted Hannah McNair the day after it happened, just to share how awesome I thought it was. She told me that Cal had to be kind of told what shotgunning a beer was. I don't think he needed to be told like that action existed, because I'm guessing Cal, who went to the University of Texas, has seen people before. Hell, if you've watched any movie that involves a fraternity, you've seen people shotgun beers. Maybe he just didn't know it was called a shotgun. He also did it because he didn't want the players to do it. Luke Combs wanted all the players to shotgun a beer, and Cal's like, nope, they're trying to win a Super Bowl. They're in training camp. I'll do it. Major sacrifice by the owner of the team. So, and then he punts the can into the crowd. I mean, Cal is just awesome right now. The Cal McNair experience is the greatest. And this is something that's been happening for a while now. The man on the street, excuse me, I just burped into the microphone. The man on the street interview that he did with that guy, the School of Hard Knocks guy, where he asked Cal all those questions about being a billionaire. When the uniforms got leaked, the new uniforms, Cal just going on Reddit and saying, fuck you, here's some better pictures of it. The cookout that he does now, which they're going to do next week, I found out because I need to know this because I'm one of his helpers. But the Cal's cookout is amazing. I don't know if there's probably a better comeback that we've seen on the field somewhere. I can't remember a player or an owner or a coach whose PR went 180 flip, man. Just crazy. You're absolutely right. Cody from McMahon. Appreciate the question, Tyler. Cody from McMahon. With the rule changes regarding kickoffs, how does this affect the coach's decisions on who to keep and who to let go on the final 53-man roster? I think it remains to be seen, man. Frank Ross has done two press conferences now during training camp, and you can tell he's still trying to figure the whole thing out. And Frank Ross is one of the most intelligent special teams coaches, one of the most acute special teams coaches out there, and he's still trying to figure it out. I think there's still a lot of trial and error going on. I also think that I don't think there's any chance they scrap this kickoff this season, but I think there's a chance this could be a one and done. Now, obviously, the question is about roster this year. I don't know. Like, do they keep more linebacker types? Do they keep more? I have no idea. My hypothesis had always been that we could see more regulars on special teams. That has not been the case with the Texans. Other than Tank Dell going out and returning punts, I can't remember regulars being out there on special teams for the Texans at all. Like, it's looked the same. So I could see maybe some teams start to experiment or have already experimented with bigger body types with the blocking. I just think the whole thing's been a clusterfuck, and it hasn't been fun to watch. There haven't been nearly the number of explosive plays that I thought there might be. And I don't know that it's any more safe. I don't know that it's safer than the previous version, which is the main things that they wanted to accomplish was more returns, fewer touchbacks. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I think there's a chance we could see teams just booting it out the back of the end zone at some point because they don't want to get guys hurt. And I think we've seen guys, it lends itself to a lot of awkward blocking and tackling. I just think so far it's a fail to me. Cody also says the reason he's asking that question is because his nephew plays for the Colts and he's a third string linebacker who might be in position. And by the way, third string linebacker, that's how you're going to make a roster, is show that you can get in on kickoffs and punts and make some tackles. He says, my nephew is Grant Stewart, who had an amazing article written about him in The Athletic. And Cody, I saw that article, and Grant spells his name Stuard. Cody, I'm not saying that for your benefit. I know you know that. I'm saying it for the audience's benefit. Find this story. It's an amazing story. He's from here in Houston, Grant Stewart is, and it's just an incredible, incredible story about overcoming familial adversity. Mother, a drug addict, issues with his parents, went to the University of Houston. A lot of you Cougs already know Grant Stewart and probably know his story, but there's an article in The Athletic about him, and go Google it and go out of your way to read it. It's really an inspiring story. So, recommend that. Thumbs up on that. Let's see here as we continue with the mail. Cody, I appreciate your email, and give Grant doesn't know me from Adam, and he's a Colt. So by proxy, I should be rooting against him, damn near ridiculing him because he's a Colt. And I will not do that. I would never ridicule him because of his story, just because Seth and I tend to ridicule the Indianapolis Colts. But tell him I'm rooting for him, man. That's just awesome. Joe Q, you guys know Joe Q, frequent emailer to the podcast. I don't know that Joe Q sent in an email meant to be read on the podcast this week. He did send me an email, and Joe, I know you know this. You sent in an email talking about my day 3-ism, you call it. That I think Joe Q thinks that I've got a bias against day 3 draft picks, or that I think that if you're drafted in day 3, it's just automatic that you're going to stink or whatever, when I know that's obviously not the case. But it's a fairly lengthy email. I'm not going to read the whole thing. And the reason I know, Joe Q, that you call this day 3-ism, because in the 4th bullet point, he says, that said, like many bigotries, there is an underlying truth to day 3-ism. He points out at me, though, that Joe Q brings up a fantasy team, like a day 3 fantasy team that you would win any league with. Okay. And I agree with all this. If your fantasy team, I don't know that you would win all leagues with this, but this would be a pretty solid fantasy team. Dak Prescott and Brock Purdy as your quarterbacks. And again, keep in mind, day 3 is rounds 4 through 7. Isaiah Pacheco and Kyren Williams and Aaron Jones as your running back. That's pretty good. I mean, Kyren was a revelation last year. You know I love Kyren Williams. I would never be a day 3-ist against Kyren Williams of Notre Dame. Tyreek Hill, Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Yeah, that's pretty fucking good. George Kittle, and then the Ferguson kid from Dallas as your tight ends, and then Harrison Bucket. And kickers are all day 3 and free agents. So whatever, just pick the best kicker, Joe Q. Why not pick? Why wasn't what round was Tucker? Justin Tucker drafted in. So anyways, Butker is his choice there. So yeah, this is the thing, Joe Q, and I know you know this, and I'm not a day 3-ist because I hate day 3 draft picks, and maybe you're not saying that, but sure, you can find one of anything in any round of a draft or any walk of life. You can find outliers at anything. It's just with day 3, you're playing the percentages, man. These are the vast exceptions to the rule that most of these guys don't end up making it. That is an interesting fantasy team, though. Is there any chance that you could actually draft that team? No, the receivers are too good. I think you could get Dak and Brock Purdy. I think you could draft, I mean, the ones that would all be gone in this day and age when receivers have all of a sudden surpassed running backs in fantasy value. Yeah, there's no way you get Tyreek, Puka, and Amon-Ra on the same team. Maybe 2 of them, maybe. And then Kittle in the 3rd. Quarterbacks and those running backs, though, I don't know. Yeah. Good stuff. Joe Q, I always appreciate you, brother. Joe Q's got a relative in the NFL as well, man. I'm not going to say who it is because I don't know that I've said it publicly on the pod before either. But Joe Q has a fairly famous relative in the NFL. So yeah, appreciate relatives of NFL players checking in on the pod. Cody and Joe Q. All right, Bobby is in. He says, How is Henry Toa Toa doing at linebacker? I don't hear his name called during the game and wonder. I didn't hear his name called during the game and wonder what you think as far as his progress as a second-year player. Seems to be flying under the radar. I don't know if that's good or a bad thing. If you're wondering what the team thinks of Henry Toa Toa, just know that he was one of the players that didn't play in the Bears game, in the Hall of Fame game. He was a healthy scratch from that game. They sat all the guys that they wanted to kind of bubble wrap for that game. So Henry Toa Toa was being treated the same way in that game as they treated Azeez Al-Shire or Stephon Diggs or C.J. Stroud. So Henry Toa Toa would seem to be above a certain line of player for this team. So, and I know they like him, man. I know they've liked him since they drafted him. Nick Caserio brought Henry Toa Toa's name up on our show without prompting before Toa Toa had even had one practice in training camp his rookie year, talking about Toa Toa's grasp of the game as a Mike linebacker. Now, he's not playing Mike on this team, Azeez Al-Shire is, but Toa Toa is going to make this team, I think. It's not a deep position linebacker. I don't know if he'd be making the team on a team that has a deeper linebacker group. It's one of the shallowest parts of the depth chart on this team, in my opinion. He's doing fine, though. To answer your question, Bobby, I think he's had a better than expected camp than I thought he would have. So I think he's going to make the team. I think he'll be a contributor on special teams. And if Christian Harris doesn't get healthy, Henry Toa Toa is probably going to get a ton of snaps against the Indianapolis Colts in week 1. Christian Harris left practice again on Sunday. That was his first practice he suited up for all year and or all training camp, and he was gone back in the building halfway through practice with presumably an injury that he aggravated. So I'll have eyes on practice today. Keep tuned for the practice report pod later on today, and I'll have an update for you. All right, a few more of these. I got 3 more mailbag questions. This is from Tex Fan J. I heard some arguments that Mechie isn't popping in games because they're just using him to run off coverage for the crossers, etc. Is Mechie showing up in team activities at practice, or is he just looking good in the one-on-ones? Thanks for what you do. No problem, Tex Fan J. I love what I do. Mechie has looked good in the one-on-one drills. That's where you can see his athleticism and his explosiveness returning. As far as team activities go, not really. He's got a real issue with drops right now. That's the problem. If they're using him to, I don't know about using him to run off coverage for the crossers, etc. I haven't watched the game closely enough about Mechie to know that that's the case. I'm just telling you, he's having trouble holding onto the football, and he's non-existent out there. So I think Mechie's in real danger of not making the team, and it's unfortunate. Appreciate the email, Tex Fan J, and thank you for the kind words. Thomas, hey, Sean, love the show. Longtime listener, first-time mailbag. Oh, man, I wish I had some sort of sound effect for a first-time mailbag. My dinging bell is in the other studio right now. Says, what are your thoughts on Cam Akers? Initially thought to be just a camp body, but he's looked good, arguably better than Dameon Pierce. If it were up to me right now, Cam Akers would be ahead of Dameon Pierce in the rotation, and I think he's closing ground on him. D'Amico gushed about Cam Akers on Sunday after the practice was over, and Cam Akers was on Sunday getting run with C.J. Stroud at quarterback in practice. Now, keep in mind, Joe Mixon was suited up again but didn't participate in 11-on-11 drills, and Dameon Pierce did participate in 11-on-11 drills with C.J. ahead of Cam Akers. But Cam Akers had previously been out there with the Davis Mills and Case Keenum units. He's clearly turning some heads. He's been in this system. D'Amico has scouted and game planned against him for a long time with all the years Cam Akers played with the Rams. If it keeps going the way it's going, it would not shock me one bit if Cam Akers jumped ahead of Dameon Pierce and made the team and was ahead of Dameon Pierce in the rotation, or even displaced Dameon Pierce with the team. It's just Mixon's health is such a wild card right now because he is the one fully healthy, been a bell cow type vet that's been in this system. So that's such a wild card right now that if there's still issues with Joe Mixon's health, I could see that really helping Cam Akers as a veteran. because the rest of the guys, Dario Gumawale, I think could make the team just based on special teams and being a spot guy in the backfield, occasional carries in the backfield. The rest of the guys in there, British Brooks, J.J. Taylor, Jawar Jordan, they're all young guys. And I think they're young guys who I think would clear waivers and they could re-sign to the practice squad. So those are my thoughts on Cam Akers. He is definitely, Thomas, a green arrow up next to his name guy. All right. We'll finish up with France in the North. France lives up in Toronto, but I like calling him France in the North because it reminds me of Game of Thrones. The King in the North. France, looking forward to meeting you when you come in for a game this year. He said it looked as though at the start of camp, Mechie seemed to have secured a spot as one of the receivers on the team, but the drops are hurting him as of late. The team talks a lot about stacking days together. What are your thoughts on the stacking of bad days together? Is it just all in his head now? It looks like something mental with John Mechie. Drops for a guy who gets picked in the second round. John Mechie doesn't have the physical tools to have been drafted in the second round if he had issues with drops. And we all watch. It's not like he went to Idaho or something. He went to fucking Alabama. And so he clearly, hands were not an issue at Alabama for him. Like Will Fuller had issue with his hands coming into the NFL. He also ran a 4.2 40. So you dealt with some of that. But yeah, I think it can snowball on you. Especially when you're not used to not being one of the better players. I don't want to say John Mechie isn't used to adversity. The dude beat cancer. So I want to be careful with how I phrase that. But when you've been a good player your whole life and now you start to go through a spell where you're at the bottom of the depth chart, and I know the guy dealt with cancer, but like adversity comes in different flavors. And I know cancer is a much more dire, life-threatening adversity, but this is something he hasn't really seen before, because I think last year was sort of an outlier. Like I think he was going to make the team last year, even with still coming back from cancer. Now he's back at full strength, Mechie is, and things aren't working for him right now. That can be tough mentally, I would imagine. France in the North also asked me, do you feel as strongly about the Titans wearing the H-Town blue, or is that something that has just gained more steam recently since they wore their alternate jersey against us? I'll just tell you where I am with the whole Oiler uniform thing in general. I love the idea that the guys on Bussin' with the Boys had, Taylor Lewan and Will Compton, about the first Titans-Texans game having a stipulation where the winner got to wear the Oiler uniform for the second game. I think that's fun. I think it'd be really cool. It'll never happen because these are, there's uniform stuff is way more complicated probably than it needs to be. But I thought as a WWE fan, especially, I'm all about any sort of stipulation. I'm just not as angry about the Oiler uniform thing on the Titans anymore. Like last year, it was, they hadn't worn them. They wore them against the Texans. They're clearly trying to piss off the Texans. What did the Texans do? They ended up beating them with their third string or backup quarterback with Case Keenum. So, I mean, the Titans are just a ratchet ass franchise right now with Will Levis, the mayonnaise king, at quarterback. And they don't know who they are right now. They're signing all these big free agents, but we don't know if they've got the right guy at quarterback. I fear zero about the Tennessee Titans right now. And thus, for me to get upset about them wearing Oiler uniforms, I feel like we're definitively punching down. Let Amy Adams go have her little play date by herself and wear her little cosplay uniforms, and then we'll just whoop their ass the 2 times that the 2 teams play this season. That feels like a lot more fun. Plus, I think it helps that the Texans have now revealed the new uniforms, and I really don't give a shit about the Oiler uniforms because I think the Texan uniforms are badass. So that's how I feel about it, France. Appreciate you, as always. He says, outstanding work grinding out all those podcasts before they went away to Canton. There's more coming. Good segue, France. Nice job. There'll be another pod coming later today. There'll be one coming tomorrow. There'll be one coming on Thursday. All post-practice podcasts. And then Friday, I will have a preview for the Giants coming to town this weekend. Things to watch for in the Giants and Texans on Saturday. So let's wrap this bad boy up so that I can get out to watch the fellas practice in this 108-degree heat. Once again, a reminder, HOU mailbag at gmail.com, HOU mailbag at gmail.com to send in your emails for the next mailbag, which will be on Tuesday of next week. And again, a reminder, subscribe, rate, review the podcast. Big thanks to Anthony Irwin, my producer, for getting this podcast out to you guys in a timely fashion. I'll see you all later today with a Practice Report podcast. Until then, have a great Tuesday or whatever day it is you're listening to this, everybody. See you later.